Xenoblade Chronicles is an every JRPG ever simulator released in 2012 for the Wii and ported for the 3DS in 2015. Before I begin, even though I haven't played the 3DS version, if you ever do choose to play this game, I'd recommend the Wii version. Graphical fidelity is higher, multiple control types, you can play it on a television, plus, despite its rarity, is a better value. So unless you already own a new 3DS and need some more games to pad out the library, I'd recommend the Wii version any day of the week. That's assuming you want to play the game in the first place, and before you do that, you want to know if it's any good, which is why you're here. I think. In the interest of time, I'll tell you right now that the game is a bit overrated and only a decent JRPG at best. It's been regarded as a masterpiece, and I liked it, but not that much. I've got a lot of ambivalence toward this game. Sorry Xenoblade fans, but your game kinda sucks. However, it's really too big and too unique a game to use such a blanket statement. So if you're not interested in time and would prefer to kill it, you can stay a while and listen to what I have to say about it. Hopefully I can hold your interest for the duration. Being an RPG, I can't help but spoil a few plot points, but I'll be keeping all the important twists to a minimum. Before I delve into the story and such, I'd like to discuss exactly what kind of a game Xenoblade Chronicles is. Like I said, it's a very, very big game. By that I mean it's very long and the world is very large. Complexity-wise, it's fairly simple. A common observation I hear would be that it's a single-player MMO, and I'd mostly agree with that. If you're a fan of the type of combat, quest, and item system that many MMOs have, like World of Warcraft, then you'll no doubt enjoy the way that Xenoblade Chronicles plays. You walk around a 3D environment, and initiating a battle is as simple as getting an enemy to aggro onto you, either by line of sight, sound, or other provocation. You and two other party members will begin to auto-attack the enemy. Xenoblade's combat then branches off into managing your arts. A character's arts determine which kind of attack, buff, or defensive measure you or the AI wants to activate. Each character generally specializes in one form of combat or another, be it tanking, DPS, or healing. Enemies will have an aggro towards a certain party member whom they will focus their attacks on, but of course, strategic use of your arts can give you a hand in controlling that as well. Certain enemies have weakness to certain types of attacks, and likewise have certain strengths. Your position and proximity to an enemy may also have to be taken into account with certain circumstances. There's definitely a lot to learn when it comes to how to go about a battle and how to configure your party for certain battles. You will directly control only one of the party members, while two others act on their own with the setup you assigned them. It's definitely not your typical turn-based combat system, and in fact goes much deeper when you factor in chain attacks, Monado arts, the party meter, and gem buffs, which is helpful since you'll be fighting a lot. Then, of course, there's the future vision mechanic, which allows you to see an enemy's attack before it makes one. This only ever happens when there's a particularly strong attack which will either kill or take off a huge amount of health from a party member. You can use this knowledge to change the future so the attack will not be quite as devastating, or even prevent it from happening altogether. So even though it seems like your standard MMO-type combat on the surface, it has a fair amount of its own nuance and complexity, which the game explains incrementally through use of pop-ups, which you can then read more about in the tutorial section. And there's more yet that you can discover on your own. Naturally, there also exists a leveling system, which allows you to advance your skills. You level up by gaining experience, which can be acquired by killing monsters, fulfilling quests, or exploring. There are 480 quests in Xenoblade Chronicles, 449 if you don't count story-related. These can be good ways to gain experience or money. They usually involve killing certain enemies for certain drops, or wandering around picking up orbs scattered about an area for a specific number of ingredients. These quests highlight some of my biggest complaints with Xenoblade Chronicles. There are these types of quests which are labeled as timed, which means that once you pass a certain point in the story, they are no longer available to be completed since they'll be anachronistic. There are 130 of these buggers, and sometimes there isn't any kind of warning for when you pass that point of no return. Collecting orbs is necessary for a lot of quests, and can be an extremely tedious process, especially when a quest involves acquiring multiple rare materials. You may be subject to over an hour of wandering around an area, collecting every single item orb until you get what you're looking for. It doesn't fulfill any kind of purpose either. You'll be exploring all the areas for the experience anyway, and other quests will have you explore the areas further. The orbs wouldn't be so bad if their drops weren't so rare. They only exist to give you busy work and hang up your progression trying to complete a certain quest or fill out your Collectopedia. And did I mention that there are also entire areas that have points of no return for which you can no longer collect orbs from? Yeah, wonderful. To be fair, you can buy item orbs from certain NPCs. But before you can do that, you must first gain relation with them by completing more quests. So, before you can complete a quest, you first have to complete 5 more quests, but one of those quests requires an item which you need to wander around an area for an hour to find, or complete 4 quests from a different NPC. On top of that, all the NPCs have schedules, so they only appear during certain times of the day. So after you're learning the positions of the 1 million quest givers and trading NPCs, you also need to remember which time of day they actually appear. And sometimes they don't even show that they have a quest unless you have a certain affinity rank with the town and talk to them out of the blue. The amount of quests available is just daunting. Frankly, trying to do all of them on your first playthrough is foolish. You can get through pretty much the whole game only doing a few quests here and there when the story slows down a bit. I've never done all the quests, nor will I ever, because that would extend my playtime by about 40 hours of wandering around the map collecting orbs, or waiting for it to start raining so I can get a certain drop from a certain enemy that only appears in one specific area while it's raining, and even then I'm only getting 400 in experience and a level 1 gem. Whoop-de-doo. I would like to do all of the quests, but the sheer amount of them kills the momentum of the story and discourages me from doing more than a couple at a time, especially since only a few quests have decent experience rewards. I would argue that the best way to play Xenoblade Chronicles would be to actually do as few quests as possible. Accept them all in case you happen to complete them along your way, but try not to go out of your way unless you need the XP, and make sure you're doing the ones that actually give XP. What about people who don't want to do quests at all? What if you just want to play through the main story without having to bother with all that side stuff? First of all, you probably want to avoid the JRPG genre as a whole if that's the case, but regardless, you'll be out of luck since there isn't enough XP between explorations and killing whatever's in your way to keep your levels high enough to beat the next boss. Unless you like grinding, they're your only other option. Sure, they open up trading opportunities and whatnot, but if you're only interested in the story, then it doesn't matter. I'd take quests with miniature storylines that flesh out the game world over plain old grinding any day, but there's no way to avoid either of them since they've been staples of the genre pretty much since the very beginning. The best thing about the quests is that you don't always have to return to the quest giver in order to claim your reward for most of them. Those are some of my biggest complaints with the game, but don't worry, there's more. Before we get into that though, let's talk a bit about the story. Like any good JRPG, the story is a large part of the game. Due to the many different plot points and spoilers scattered throughout the game, I'll only be talking about it in a generalized sense. If you absolutely cannot stand spoilers, I'll put an annotation skipping this part. Two titans, known as the Bionis and the Mechonis, waged a battle on each other. In the end, both were killed and life flourished on their corpses. The Bionis housing your typical carbon-based life forms, and the Mechonis housing the more mechanical-based life. The long and short of it is that the citizens of Bionis and Mechonis don't like each other for some unknown reasons. Enter Shulk, who is just a simple boy living on the Bionis' lower leg, who is trying to unlock the mysteries of a legendary blade known as the Monado, which is the only weapon capable of destroying Mechon with ease. However, only wieldable by certain people for unknown reasons. One day, the Mechon attack Shulk's hometown, very nearly destroying everything there and killing Shulk's sweetheart, Fiora. Shulk, along with his childhood friend Rhine, go out on their own, Monado in tow, to get revenge on the Mechon. The rest of the game follows Shulk and Rhine venturing all around Bionis and Mechonis, seeking vengeance for Fiora's death, and to find out why the Mechon are even attacking Bionis in the first place. Along the way, they travel through many different lands and meet many others willing to help them on their quest. So yeah, it's a revenge story, and that's pretty much it. Quite honestly, the story of Xenoblade Chronicles is very by-the-numbers and plain. I really like the idea that you're living on the corpses of two long-dead titans, but the story doesn't really break off into its own thing until very near the end, and even then it's not anything you haven't seen before in some other RPG or one of my Japanese animes. Take the characters, for example. You have the cute blonde-haired hero, his simple but strong red-headed friend, the gun-wielding fan service, the refined yet capable gentleman hero, the kawaii elf princess, and the dumb animal thing. And that's just your own party. It's not even a subversion of typical archetypes. They all act in exactly the way that you expect them to. But despite the fact that they're all uninspired, cookie-cutter characters, they're all still charming and likable. They all have great chemistry, and maybe that's the reason that they seem so standard, because it works so well. All of the characters contribute valuable input for the duration of the story, and they also provide commentary during battles.
Let's focus our efforts!
Okay.
You'll be hearing them pull the same quips throughout the entire game over and over and over again, which can get pretty annoying, but somehow they're not as annoying as you might imagine, and occasionally bring a smile to your face. Shulk is always feeling it, Dunban doesn't want anybody to be careless, Sharla always needs a shower, and it's always Rhine time. It's that campy type of humor that doesn't really get too old or annoying.
You're a lifesaver!
Chronicles never got a full North American localization, so the entire cast consists of British voice actors. Not that there ever needed to be a North American localization, because all the actors give a superb performance. Notable mention to Shulk's voice actor, Adam Howden, who really nails the emotional scenes.
I'll kill you!
All the accents help add that extra layer of campy humor for American audiences. Well, at least it did for me.
Man, what a bunch of jokers.
I have plenty of other gripes with the story, but that would involve spoilers, so suffice to say that I was never really invested or interested, and we'll just move along. The soundtrack of Xenoblade is one of the few aspects I believe deserves as much praise as it gets. Featuring compositions from the likes of Yoko Shimomura and Yasunori Mitsuda, among others, the game is jam-packed with really great songs that all fit extremely well, so much so that some of the cutscenes sync themselves up with the attitude of the music. If the game doesn't interest you, then you at least owe it to yourself to listen to the soundtrack. It's easily one of the highlights of the game. To round out my list of compliments, I'll now address the environments. Up close, the game seems very graphically dated and a bit ugly, but if you pull back a bit and take a look around at the world of Xenoblade Chronicles, it's a marvel to behold. Each area is unique and beautiful in its own way, and the interconnection between them all is a really nice touch. Soaking in all the sights is one of the best experiences you can have in the game. Some areas even take advantage of the day and night cycle, giving you a fantastic new view of what may have seemed to be a bleak area, complemented perfectly by the music tracks. It's really quite a treat to wander through all the areas and just look around at your own pace. But again, those item orbs can really suck the fun out of it, and drifting too close to an enemy will trigger battle music, ruining that part of it as well. All the areas open up linearly as the story progresses, but their expansiveness leaves the game devoid of that hallway-like progression plagued by RPGs these days. Well, that about sums up my compliments for the game. Now we're going to jump back into my complaints, starting with the combat portion of the game, namely the bosses. Many bosses in the game are your standard test of skill wrapped up in a prolonged encounter with a big bad monster. Absolutely fine, no complaints there. The problem arises as the game goes on in the form of false start and forced failure. You've probably had this happen to you in a different game. You're fighting a boss and you chip his health bar down about halfway. Then a short cutscene plays and the real boss battle begins with a new twist, or the fight just ends prematurely. That, or you're playing against a clearly superior enemy whom you're not intended to be able to beat for story purposes. Forced failure pops up fairly infrequently, but the game is plagued with false starts. The problem is determining which is which. Let's say you're fighting a particularly hard boss. You chip about a third of its health down before it wipes you out. Should you A, give it another go and see if the boss concludes early on, or B, grind on enemies and quests till you level up your party in order to comfortably take on the beast? Were you only a few hit points away from finishing the fight, or do you really have to take that thing down all the way? Sometimes the answer is obvious if the enemy is 20 levels higher than your party, but sometimes not so obvious when it's only 5 or 10 levels higher and you can't even damage it. Worst of all, sometimes you'll grind your way to beat a boss only for it to have a second phase where it's 5 levels higher than before. The end of the game in particular is packed with boss fight after boss fight, growing stronger and stronger with little time in between to level up your own party, with forced failures and false starts absolutely littered throughout them all. Finally, my list of complaints ends with a nitpick for the game's menu system, which makes looking up NPCs, viewing relation levels, and viewing party info a chore to deal with. Most menu subsections can only be accessed after a very short but very annoying loading screen. Trying to find a certain NPC to find his or her schedule can be a nightmare when looking for their bubble, and quest arrangement settings never save, so you'll always have to select what you want from the drop menu each time you go in. Here's a good example of this in action. I have this quest, which I've gained all the necessary ingredients for, but I can't remember who gave me the quest. So I have to open up the quest menu, and select where I think I got the quest from, and look up who gave me the quest. Then I open up the affinity chart, and search for that character's schedule. After that, I open up the clock to change the time for that character. Then I teleport to the area where the NPC is, and then I just look around until I find her. Hooray! 1,000 experience. That was worth running around for an hour. These are all relatively small annoyances, but together they all break up the flow of the game and make accomplishing simple tasks more annoying than they ought to be. Some better integration could have gone a long way to make the game feel smoother. Alright, I've droned on far longer than anyone ever wanted to hear about this game. Worse yet, there's even more that I didn't even cover, like gems, affinity, and rebuilding Colony 6. All good inclusions with their own weaknesses, but if I went through everything this game had to offer, we'd be here all night. Is it the greatest RPG of the generation? I don't know. I haven't played very many, but I'm going to venture a guess to say no, it isn't. It's complex and easy to understand, but that doesn't make it a masterpiece. The story has its moments, but feels generic. The characters are enjoyable, but still feel like the same characters you were playing as 20 years ago. The gameplay is unique and varied, but frustrating and monotonous at more than a few points. The scenery and level design is outstanding, and the music is phenomenal. It's an interesting game to go through, but it struggles to hold my interest for the 60 to 70 hour runtime. The only reason I felt the need to finish it was because I had already plugged in so many hours to begin with. Had this been my first JRPG and I'd never seen an anime before, the story and characters might have enchanted me. And maybe that's the point. Give newcomers that classic RPG story which veterans can knowingly nod to and appreciate. And I guess that's okay. Plus the hidden lore is really fun to uncover. Maybe I was expecting too much with the game's reputation, or maybe because I'm not a fan of the MMO-style combat and quests. But Xenoblade Chronicles failed to deliver that great RPG experience I had heard so much about. It was pretty fun while it lasted, but the amount of dedication the game asks of you to put into it and the ordinary structure of it all just makes you feel like you're eating empty calories. Like I said, if this were my first JRPG, I probably would have been enamored with it, but I'm not because I've played Golden Sun. Not bad, not great, but through and through a straight down the middle, decent experience. To backpedal even further, my entire experience was overall positive. It's probably a good game, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't slightly underwhelmed. I loved the way it looked. I loved the way it sounded. The combat was a nice change of pace from the generic turn-based combat. The story was decent, and everything else was meh. Despite the length of this review, I've really only scratched the surface of this game, and it can really come down to player experiences, so just because mine was less than stellar doesn't mean yours won't be. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, and decide for yourself if it's a game worth investing your time into. To simplify things as best as I can, if I was at some sort of video game restaurant and said to the waiter, "Give me a JRPG," and the waiter brought me Xenoblade Chronicles, I would say, yes, that is exactly what I ordered. Nothing more, nothing less. Hey, congratulate me on my very first PG review. Yeah, it was a fucking nightmare.